Hey, I'm Matthew and welcome. In this video, I'll guide you step by step through creating a booking application for a clinic. We'll use Func Runner along with OpenAI Assistants to build an application that integrates function calling, a tool that makes your assistants even more powerful. By the end of this video, you'll have a fully functional app ready to customize and deploy. Let's dive in. All right, before we can actually get started developing our Func Runner application, we need to create a Func Runner API key. To do that, go to funcrunner.com and go to your integrations dashboard. Once there, you'll see a screen that looks vaguely similar to the one you see now. We're going to go ahead and click on Create New Integration. For description, I'm going to call it Booking Assistant. I'm going to select Func Runner app. And lastly, I will need to provide an OpenAI API key. So I'm going to go over to the OpenAI dashboard, create a new API key. I'm going to go ahead and copy that to my clipboard so I can paste it over here. Now, Func Runner will actually validate this key to make sure it is a valid key. So you can't just put mumbo jumbo in there. You got to put in OpenAI API key. And do not worry, I have an environment dedicated to storing secret values that is completely separate from everything else. It's designed to store confidential information. So rest assured it's protected and safe and not easily accessible to anyone but you. We're going to go ahead and create that integration, and that will actually be the last time you need your OpenAI API key when developing Func Runner apps. Awesome. So now we are at the View Integration dashboard for the integration we just created. One thing we will need is a Func Runner API key, and that's what we will use here going forward now and forever. So to do that, we can click on Generate API Key. I'm going to go ahead and copy that API secret key. Now keep in mind that once I refresh this page or navigate away from this page, that secret key is going to disappear. I can only get this value one time. All right. If you ever lose your API key, you just got to come back and revoke the key and generate a new one. But I went ahead and copied that key to my clipboard, and I'm ready to get started developing my Func Runner application. So let's go jump into the code. Okay, so we got an empty PyCharm project open, and I already have my virtual environment created. If you do not know how to create in a virtual environment, go ahead and look at the description of this video, and there should be some instructions down there on how to create your virtual environment. So in order to get started programming a Func Runner application, we need to start with a couple required files. The first file that we need to create is a .env file, and that's going to store our API key for Func Runner. So we are going to create an environment variable called Func Runner API key, and I'm going to go ahead and paste in that API key that I generated in the previous step. Now we do not want to commit our secret credentials to any version control of any sort. So we're going to go ahead and create a .getignore file. And we want to make sure that .env is included inside the .getignore file. That'll make sure you don't accidentally commit any sensitive information to your Git repository. With environment variables out of the way, the next thing we need to do is create a requirements.txt file. Now, the requirements.txt file is a file that lists out all the dependencies our application needs to run. Our first dependency is Func Runner, of course, and then we will also need python-.env. So Func Runner is the framework that we will use to build our Func Runner application, and then python.env is the library that pulls out the environment variables from our .env file. Okay. All right, with the requirements.txt file out of the way, we can go and create the actual entry point to our Func Runner application. I'm going to make a file called main.py. And one of the first things I want to do is load .env. So that should be towards the uppermost top of your main.py file, because we need to load all the environment variables prior to starting the Func Runner application. And this is true of any application you write, whether it's some sort of web app or some long running service, right? You have to load all your environment before you can actually run your program. Now, let's go ahead and create a variable called app, and we will call the Func Runner app constructor. We are going to go ahead and import that Func Runner app constructor from the Func Runner library. And lastly, we want to call app.run, which will start the main application loop. Let's go ahead and try to run our program here. But the first thing we want to make sure we do is call pip install-r requirements.txt to make sure all the dependencies from our requirements.txt file are installed in our virtual environment. And then in order to run our application, we're going to call python main.py. And you will see here that our application started successfully with no errors. We can see that we have no functions currently registered and no scheduled tasks currently registered. We're going to get into functions and scheduled tasks in a bit, but you can see that our application's up and running. It just doesn't do anything useful yet. Don't worry, we'll get there. And lastly, there is a health check endpoint available as well. You will find that at the /up path, but don't worry about that too much now. We will get into health checks a little bit later. Okay, so we're building out a booking application, and for this application to actually do anything meaningful, we will want to store things in a database. So the next step is to go through the process of creating a database model using SQL Alchemy and connecting it to a SQLite database. One of the first things we're going to do is we're going to go back to our requirements.txt file. We're going to open that up, and we need to add a new dependency. So that dependency is called SQL Alchemy. So if I go ahead and save that file and I close down my server, I'm going to run pip install-r requirements.txt again, and it should install SQL Alchemy for us. Okay, so we have 4 files right now. We have a .env file, a .getignore, a main.py, and a requirements.txt file. Now, we could shove our database models into this main.py, but even though we are developing an application that is not overly complex, I still want to stay organized. Now, to do that, we will make a new Python file called database.py. And inside the database.py is where I will keep all of my database models. So the first thing we will need to do is create a base class or a base model that all of our other models will inherit from, and that is declarative base. And declarative base comes from the SQL Alchemy ORM portions of that library, okay? Any model that we create going forward is going to inherit from this base model. And what happens is when we start our database connection, we will actually create this schema on the fly, and SQL Alchemy will know how to create that schema based on whatever models inherit from this base model. So our first model will be patient. Okay, so patient will inherit from base. It will have a table name of patients. We will need an ID column, and that ID column will be the primary key. we want to make sure we import the integer type and the column type from SQL Alchemy. Next, we want to create a column for the patient's name. We want to also make sure we import string as well. Now, we don't want name to ever be null, so what we need to do is set nullable to false on that particular column. That way, if we ever pass in none or some other null value, an error will be raised, preventing the record from being saved. Okay. We're also going to create an email column as well so that we know how to contact our patients. Now, a patient will want to create an appointment, or what we will call a booking. So we will need some sort of model to represent an appointment, and we'll call that model booking. It will also inherit from base. And you'll see that we will have a table name of bookings. We're going to go ahead and create an ID column very similar to the patient model, right? We will want to have a patient ID, and this will actually reference the patient record from the patient's table as a foreign key. So let's go ahead and import that foreign key type there. And then lastly, we want to have an appointment at column, and that will be of type date time, and that will be nullable set to false as well, because you can't have an appointment without an appointment time or day. We'll make sure that date time is also properly imported. Okay, so we have two basic models here, patient and booking. Now, we want to create the relationship between these two models so that we can call on the patient record if we are given a booking, or we can get all the bookings for a patient if we have the patient record on hand, right? In order to do that, we will reference the patient's bookings through the bookings field, and then that will be a relationship. It will point to the booking model, and it back populates patient. So what back populate patient means is if we ever have a booking, right? Let's just use this as an example, and I'm going to delete this. We want to be able to call booking.patient to get that patient. Okay, so that's the first half of that relationship. Let's go back down to the booking model, and we will create a field called patient. It's a relationship to the patient model, and it back populates booking. So we can call patient.bookings, or we can call a booking.patient to get the respective patient for that appointment. Okay. So lastly, we will want to go back to our main.py file, and we will want to create an engine, and this engine will tell SQL Alchemy how to connect to our database, and we are going to have a connection string of SQLite, and it's going to point to the bookings.db file. And it's not create SQLite, it's create engine. So make sure you fix that. So we're going to import that engine. And then next we will have a database session. So we're going to have a session equals session engine. And we want to make sure we import that session from SQL Alchemy as well. And last but not least, we want to make sure our database models are created. So we're going to call base.metadata.createAll and point it to that engine. And we want to make sure we import base from our database file. Okay. And what this does here is it's going to create that database schema on the fly when we start our application. So let's go ahead and do that and see that in action. We already have our dependencies installed, and we're going to call Python main.py again, and we should see our application start without any errors. And if I look inside my folder here, it looks like PyCharm beat me to it, but we have a bookings.db database now available and sitting in our project folder. So if I actually explore that database a bit, you can see that we have a bookings table that was created for us. Obviously, we don't have anything in it right now. We will do that later. We also have a patients table. Okay, let's go ahead and start creating the first function our OpenAI Assistant can actually use. And from my experience, one of the first functions I always create is a get the current date time function for our OpenAI Assistant. A lot of times, whenever I ask an OpenAI Assistant what the current date time is, it just gets it completely wrong, or it's pretty close but not accurate enough for business use, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to give our OpenAI Assistant a method that it can call to get the current date time. So in order to do that, we want to create a new method in between our app run call and our Func Runner instantiation call, right? And I'm going to call it current date time. Okay, I'm creating a new method called current date time, and the only thing that this method is going to do is return a string of the current date time, and I'm just going to set it to UTC for now. I may switch this to my current time zone. I want to also make sure that I import the date time package as well. Now we're not quite done yet. One thing I want you to also do is go and add a decorator to the current date time method, and that decorator is at app.function. Okay, so any method that has the app.function decorator on it will add this method to what is known as the function registry within your Func Runner app. And all that is a fancy way of saying this is a list of methods that my OpenAI Assistant can use. Okay. So keep in mind, if you change this to like my app or something like that, you need to also change the decorator as well, because the first part of that decorator is the name of the variable that has the Func Runner app instantiation. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and change mine back to app because I'm being picky. But yeah, so that basically will create our first function for our OpenAI Assistant to use. So if we go back to our terminal here and I run python main.py again, we will see that now our output looks slightly different. We have a function available called current date time, and it becomes available to our app due to this decorator here. So app.function, that's where all the magic happens. And lastly, what I want you to always remember is that any function that you write, it needs to return a string, no matter what, okay? And that's because we're talking to a large language model and it expects us to talk to it in strings. That doesn't mean you can't send data back or structured data back. You just have to format that structured data as a string. So for example, if you have a dict, it might behoove you to do a json.dumps on that dictionary to convert that dictionary to a JSON string representation, okay? And you'll see that more going forward. It's just a heads up right now, but I will reiterate this multiple times throughout this tutorial, and by the end of the tutorial, you'll totally understand why we're doing this, okay? So we have our first function available, and we want to actually attach this to the assistant. So let's go ahead and jump over and create our first assistant. Okay, so I have our browser window open here. I went to our OpenAI dashboard and went over to the Assistants tab here on the left-hand side. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to create our first assistant. I'm going ahead and clicked on Create Assistant there, and then I'm going to give our assistant a friendly name called Booking Assistant. Now, here's where we would want to give our assistant some basic instructions. I'm going to give mine some very basic instructions for now, just as a placeholder, right? We will say you are a helpful front desk assistant responsible for booking and managing patient appointments. You will need to gather basic information for each new patient to include at a minimum their name and email address. And that's all I'm going to put for now. Okay, it doesn't really matter right now. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on this assistant ID immediately below the name of our assistant here, so I can have that for later, because I'm going to jump over to our code here in a minute. One thing I also want you to notice is that right now we currently don't have any functions associated with this assistant. Now, in the past, prior to using Func Runner, you would have to come in here and you would have to click Add Function, and then you would have to write out a JSON object for each function that you have available for your assistant. And you can see here that it has a very specific schema that it needs to use. And if you don't use the right schema, then it won't work. And it can be kind of tricky, especially when you start getting into nested types or complex data types for arguments. But Func Runner makes that super easy, and you'll never have to touch this, okay? Unless you just really want to go look at what is generated, you'll pretty much be able to leave this alone completely, okay? So right now we don't have any functions currently registered with our current assistant here, our booking assistant, but we're about to change that. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to jump back over to our code, and I'm actually going to go into our .m file over here, and then I'm gonna create a new environment variable, and I'm gonna call it OpenAI Assistant ID. Okay, and then I'm just gonna paste in that key there, okay, or that ID for our assistant there. So now when I jump back over to our main.py file, when we instantiate our application, unless we specify which assistant is being used, our functions won't automatically sync to our assistant. So in order to do that, we can just say assistant ID equals os.getinv OpenAI Assistant ID. And that's actually going to pull that environment variable out of our .m file for us, and then set our Func Runner app to point at that assistant. Now, if I go and I actually shut down our server and restart it again, it's going to update that assistant with our functions. You can see here that we have some additional logging coming out of our server when we first start it. You can see that we still have that available function of current date time, but we also are updating our assistant functions with the given assistant ID, excuse me. And then it'll go through the steps of generating that specification that I was talking about earlier for you. So if I actually refresh this page here and I take a look, you'll see that current date time is now available for our assistant to use. Okay. So one thing that we can also do is, if we use a docstring, we can say gets the current date time for our server, our bookings server. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to restart our application there, because every time you restart your application, it will go back and resync all the functions to your assistant. And if I reload the page here, you can see that now the description is updated for our method that we have here. All right, which is pretty cool. So now we can actually see this in action. If I go back over to our integration on Func Runner and I refresh the page, and I should have our booking assistant available over here on the left. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into a playground by clicking Create Playground, and I'm just going to ask it, what's the current date time? And it should, since we're 5 hours ahead or behind, it should be something like I don't know, late at night UTC basically. And we're just waiting on that message to return. and you can see here that the current date time is, yeah, midnight, right? So midnight, because it's 7:47 p.m. right now, and we have January 8th, midnight, 12:45, 12:46 a.m. So very early in the morning, UTC time. But this gives you an idea, because if we go back and we actually look at our code over here, we can see that um, when we submitted that chat, right, the booking assistant said, okay, I have a function to figure out what the current date time is. So I'm going to ask that that function be executed. And what our Func Runner application did was actually queued that up for our server to process, and our server picked up that message off the queue, right? Started executing that current date time method, and then returned the results of that method back to our OpenAI assistant. And then our OpenAI assistant was able to, um, generate some text saying, hey, this is the current date time. Okay, we're on a roll now. We actually are starting to see our work come to life here. Our OpenAI assistant can figure out what the current date time is. But that's not really what we're here to do. We're here to create a booking agent that will help us manage our new patients and get them booked for appointments. So let's go ahead and actually create a new method. So we want to create a method for creating a patient. So we're going to call that method create patient, and it's going to accept a series of parameters, the first one being name of type string, and then it's also going to accept an email of type string as well. Okay, and don't forget to decorate that app or that function with app.function. Okay, and now we can actually go through the process of creating our patient record. Well, our OpenAI assistant will be creating our patient record for us, right? We just have to write the code for it to do that. Because previously, OpenAI wouldn't have any way of talking to your database, and that's why Func Runner is so cool. It makes it easy for your OpenAI assistants to start communicating with external resources like your own databases or external APIs, that kind of thing. So let's actually see that happen live. Okay, so we're going to create a record here just like we normally would. So let's go ahead and we'll create a new patient, and that patient will have a name and an email address. Then we want to go ahead and add that patient record to our database session, and then we want to commit that patient record. So next we want to go ahead and we want to return a string representation of that patient. Okay, so we're going to do that just like that, and we're going to see what happens here. Okay, so let's go ahead and actually restart our server, and we are going to see a couple different things. We now see that our available functions includes current date time and create patient. Okay, so let's go back over to our chat and let's ask our booking. Let's pretend we're a new patient. Okay, and just see what our booking assistant says back to us. We'll say, hi, I am a new patient and I am interested in your services. So we submitted that to our booking assistant, and let's see how our booking assistant behaves. It's always kind of a mystery, right? All right, so we got a response back. It says, welcome, I'm glad to hear you're interested in our services. To get started, could you please provide me with your name and email address so we can set up your patient profile? That's super cool. We didn't really provide a whole lot inside of our instructions, and our booking assistant already kind of knows what to do based on the functions that we gave it, right? So if I actually go back over here and refresh our assistant page on OpenAI, you can see that we have a create patient method now available to our assistant. So we'll say, okay, my name is Matthew and my email address is matthew@example.com. And we'll send that over, and let's see what the booking assistant does for us. I can already kind of see our logs over here doing something. It looks like it's processing a create patient request, so that's good. It says, thank you, Matthew. Your patient profile has been created successfully. If you have any other questions or need to schedule an appointment, feel free to let me know. So that's super cool. But let's actually go look at our patient's database and see if that record's actually there. I'm hoping it is. Okay, it is. That's great. And we see that Matthew is now a patient. We captured his email, and yeah, he now has a patient ID. All right. So let's go ahead and create our next method over here. We need to create an appointment. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to go ahead and follow the same pattern that we did before. We're going to create a new method called create booking, and we want to use the app function decorator on that as well. Okay. And for our method parameters, we're going to get a little verbose here, and I'm going to tell you why. I think it's better to be more explicit on what you're asking your OpenAI assistant to provide, from my experience when it comes to function calling, because if you give it too broad of a range to kind of screw up, and you're not explicit in telling it what you want, it can just start making weird assumptions, right? So what we're going to do is we're actually going to just say, okay, hey, we want the year of the booking, we want the month of the booking, we want the day, and we want the hour. And for the purposes of our business, we're just going to assume that appointments are on the hour, every hour, and that the bookings, let's say appointments typically last an hour, right? So we also are going to need a patient ID, right? And that's going to be an int as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a patient, and then we're going to get that patient by the ID. And then we're going to say, okay, if patient is none, we're going to simply return could not find patient with the given ID. And then I'm just going to go ahead and put in the patient ID. And we're going to do a string format. So we're kind of like saying, hey, you know, you gave me an ID, but that ID doesn't exist in our database. Okay. Next, we are actually going to just go ahead and create a booking. So let's go ahead and create that booking, and we have a patient ID of patient ID, right? And then we are going to have an appointment at time, okay? And for that, we're just going to use the parameters from our method here, or arguments from our method here, and pass them in one by one into our date time constructor. Okay, so we're going to add that booking, and then we're going to commit that booking, and then we'll return a string representation of that booking. So I don't know what's going to happen quite yet. Let's just see where we're at and then go from there. So, okay, let's say I want an appointment for next Tuesday at 2 p.m. And we'll see how the assistant reacts. All right, so next Tuesday will be January 14th at 2025. I'll proceed to book your appointment for Tuesday, January 14th, 2025 at 2 p.m. Please give me a moment. It says the actual booking functionality is not implemented in the current system interaction. You might want to proceed contacting the clinic directly or checking the online booking. That's because I probably did not restart the server. So if I go back over here and refresh the page, we should see two functions available here. Looks like OpenAI is having some issues. Okay, but I'm gonna go ahead and just restart the server, and then now we have our create booking method available. Let's go back over here and then say, okay, let's try that again. So our OpenAI Assistant received our message. It's taking a look at it. It's queued up right now. I can see that on our run history on the right, which means that OpenAI is just waiting for the opportunity to process our request. And we should see that get sent to our backend over here. And it looks like it did. So it looks like it's executing function of create booking. It passes in the patient ID, which I'm guessing it inferred from the conversation previously when we returned the patient record when the patient went through the onboarding process, right? And you can see here that says your appointment has been successfully scheduled for Tuesday, January 14th at 2 p.m. Thank you, and let us know if you have any questions. Okay, so let's actually go check and make sure that booking was saved to our database, and it is. You can see that we have a booking ID of 1. The patient is currently booked, or the patient ID is 1, and they're booked for the time we asked for. Okay. It does look like we have a warning here. It looks like we are using the looks like they deprecated a method on SQL Alchemy. So let's go and see, what we can do about that. Okay, so we'll worry about that here in a minute. I'll go get the updated syntax for that. But yeah, so we're able to create a booking and create a patient so far, and we'll move on to creating some additional methods here in a minute. Okay, so jumping back into our code here, we have the ability for our OpenAI Assistant to create a patient and create an appointment for our patient. We left off with a warning from SQL Alchemy stating that, hey, we have a deprecated method, you need to use a new method, and that method is now just session.get, and then you pass in the model that you're trying to get and with the patient ID there. Okay, so if you haven't updated that yet, or you haven't figured that out yet, just go ahead and change that for now. Now let's go ahead and actually create a couple more functions. All right, so let's say we are a returning patient, right? So perhaps we want to go ahead and pretend that we are a patient coming back to this clinic for a second or third or fourth or even fifth time maybe, and we want to do a follow-up appointment. What we want to do is not create a new patient record. We want our booking assistant to be smart enough to say like, hey, okay, it sounds like this person's an existing patient. We don't need to create a new patient record. We need to go get the existing patient record. And in order to do that, in a clinical setting, you might, give them your birthday and name, right? We're not going to do that here. I'm not going to collect people's birthdays and names. We're just going to do emails. Our clinic operates a little bit differently. We check patients in by an email, all right? So what we're going to do is we're actually going to go create a new function, and it's going to be get patient record, get patient profile rather, and then we're going to do get patient profile by email. So our OpenAI Assistant, we're going to provide a description for our OpenAI Assistant to use so it understands what this function is for. It says, and we're just going to say get the patient profile by email. I'm hoping that, I would think that the assistant probably would be able to infer the intent of the method simply because we gave it a good method name and a method signature, right? But I'm not going to leave it to chance. I'm going to go ahead and just say, hey, this method's used for getting a patient profile by email. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, hey, we're going to go find a patient where we look for a patient by a given email. And if not patient, we want to return, sorry, we don't have that information. we could not find a patient with that email. Otherwise, we want to return a string representation of that patient. Okay, so as we learned previously, we always need to start and stop our server again whenever we add a new method. And you can see here that we added the get patient profile method to our app here. So let's go over here back to our chat, and what we can do is we can actually create a new thread, because I don't want any of the previous conversations to interfere with what we're testing here. So this is as if, you know, you're a completely new person in a completely new conversation with the front desk person over there, right, at the clinic. So let's go ahead and let's just ask, like, hey, I'm back I need to do a follow-up appointment. Say, hey, I need to schedule a follow-up appointment. And let's just see what our booking assistant does. Our message is queued up, and our booking assistant came back and said, hey, could you please provide your email address so I can look up your profile and assist you in scheduling your follow-up appointment. Okay, perfect. So let's go ahead and provide that email address. I think I used matthew@example.com. So we're going to go ahead and provide our booking assistant with that email address, and we should see some logs trickling in over here with our OpenAI Assistant actually going and try to fetch that patient profile. Oh, it looks like it did. Okay, so let's go back over here and see what happens. It looks like it processed the function call and it returned it. We're just waiting on OpenAI to finish it. It says, okay, our booking assistant said, I have found your profile. Could you please let me know the preferred date and time for your follow-up appointment? Let's say I would like an appointment for next Monday at 12 p.m. So what's going to happen is our booking assistant's going to get that message back, and it's going to start executing some functions again. You can see our logs flowing. It's usually a good sign. If you see the logs flowing on your server, it means it's actually doing what it's supposed to do. And we're submitting back our results here in a minute. So if I take a look here, it looks like it tried to get the current date, time, and it tried to create a booking, and it tried to get the patient profile. It looks like it tried to create a patient booking with a patient ID of 0. I'm not sure why it did that, because it shouldn't be that. Okay. It seems like there's an error. Please allow me to correct it and schedule your appointment. Can you confirm your patient ID once more? So for whatever reason, it looks like it's not returning the patient ID appropriately, which makes me wonder what this string representation of patient returns. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put a breakpoint in here, and I'm going to go ahead and stop my server, and I'm going to use PyCharm's debugger to figure out what's going on. And this is a great example of how you can actually debug your code live. Well, not necessarily live, but at least in your dev environment. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to go ahead and just copy, for the sake of keeping things simple, I'm going to go ahead and copy that and create a new thread and ask it to create another booking again. So it submitted that request. It's going to ask for my email, more than likely. So I'm going to provide my email address. I'm going to go ahead and provide Matthew@example.com. Let me make sure that's actually my patient email address. Yeah, so send. All right, so we got a breakpoint here. So let's see what happens when we do a string representation of patient. Okay, so I don't like that. So that's obviously not going to work for us. So what I want to do is I want to go and create a dunder method for our patient record. So what that means is I can define a string, and this will basically return override that toString method for this particular model. So I can say patient ID equals, I don't know, self .id, and then name equals self.name, and then email equals self.email. So let's go ahead and do that instead for our string representation of our patient. And I wonder if it was able to book that patient the first time by luck. I don't know. We'll see. Okay, so it's dequeuing some stuff. We're working off the queue again. So it's getting the patient profile. Let's see what happens. Okay, I'm just going to start a new thread. Sometimes that's the easiest way to do it. So let's go ahead and say, hey, I need to schedule a follow-up appointment. And see, let's look at and see how the assistant behaves. Okay, so the assistant's asking for our email address. So my email address is matthew@example.com. It looks like the logs are trickling in. It's getting the patient profile for matthew@example.com. It's doing it again. Could be the second time, could be because of a previous run we were doing. Yeah, that's what I thought. So thank you, Matthew. I have your profile in our system. Please let me know. So let's schedule for next Tuesday at 3 p.m. Okay. We'll send that in, and we should see the logs start trickling over here. All right, it's fetching the current date time because since we're using a relative time of next Tuesday, it needs to get the current date time, so that makes sense. It's pulling up the patient profile, getting the current date time again, and it's creating the booking. It looks like it actually passed in the proper booking this time. And it says your follow-up appointment has been successfully scheduled for next Tuesday, January 14th at 3 p.m. So let's actually go look at our bookings table and make sure that is true. And it is. We can see that it's there. That's awesome. Okay, what we want to do now is give our assistant the ability to list out a patient's upcoming appointments, right? So let's say we're given the scenario where a patient calls the front desk and they're saying, hey, I forgot my appointments. What appointments do I have coming up? Okay, we need the ability for our OpenAI Assistant to answer that. So we're going to go ahead and create a new method to do that. We're going to say get patient bookings. And instead of an email, we are going to accept a patient ID. And then we're going to query for that patient ID in our database. So we're going to do session.get patient by the patient ID, and then if not patient, return sorry we couldn't find a patient with that given ID. Okay, and then we want to create a list of bookings in a JSON format. So SQL Alchemy doesn't make it super easy to convert dictionary or database records to like arrays and dictionaries. It's kind of annoying in my opinion, but we're going to just go ahead and build them out manually. So we have a bookings array, right? And we're going to say, okay, for every booking in patient.bookings, we're going to append to that bookings array a new dictionary. And then we're going to have an ID key of the booking ID. And then we're going to have a date. And that it's a booking appointment at is the current column, appropriate column name. And we need to make sure we call to string on that, because the JSON serializer in Python cannot automatically serialize datetime objects. It won't know how to do that. And then for the sake of being complete, let's go ahead and add a patient ID as well. So we have a booking patient ID. Then from there, we can actually just return a JSON.dumps of our bookings listings, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and we're gonna go ahead and restart our server. And we have a method available called getPatientBookings. I should be able to come over here and say, hey, I forgot what my upcoming appointment date is. Can you help me? And let's observe how the booking assistant behaves here. So we submitted that message to the queue. Our booking assistant came back and said, hey, can you provide me your email address so I can look up your appointments? We'll do that. So matthew@example.com is the email address we used. We sent that back over to our booking assistant. It looks like the logs are flowing, so that's a good sign. It's getting the patient profile by that email address. And it looks like it's getting the patient bookings for the appropriate patient ID. And it appears that function executed successfully. We are going back over here and it says you have 2 upcoming appointments on January 14th, 2025. The first one's at 2 p.m. and the second one is at 3 p.m. So that's pretty cool. Now we have given our assistant the ability to list out our upcoming appointments. Next, let's go through the process of perhaps deleting a booking. So let's say someone has to cancel a booking, right? Let's go ahead and do that. Okay, what we're going to do now is give our OpenAI Assistant the ability to cancel appointments. So we're going to follow the same pattern that we've been doing all along, and we're going to create a method called cancel booking. It's going to accept a patient ID and a booking ID. What we want to do is write a statement to cancel that booking for us. So and booking ID equals booking ID. So we got to make sure we import the delete statement from SQL Alchemy. Okay, and then we want to do a results equals session.execute the statement, and then we want to commit that deletion. And then what we're going to do is we're simply going to return a result of successfully canceled booking with ID, booking ID. Okay, well, we're making it a little bit more explicit there. And I want to make sure this is properly formatted. Okay, we don't even need a result here. We can just leave that. Just like that. Okay, so what we want to do is restart our app here. We're going to go ahead and go back over here, and we're going to go through the process of creating a booking again. So I'm going to be a new patient this time and say, hey, I am a new patient. Let's schedule an appointment. So it's going to be sent over to our OpenAI Assistant. They're going to ask for some basic names. So let's call my dog's name is Sugar. So I'm going to use that as my patient name. My name is Sugar, and my email is sugar@wolf.com. wolfwolf.com. I don't know. I'm just being silly. Hopefully there's not a wolfwolf.com that's likes to sue people, because that would not be fun. All right, so it says it looks like our patient profile was created and what time we would like to schedule our appointment. So let's schedule our appointment. How about next Wednesday at 1 p.m.? Sounds like a good time. Sugar's a dog. She don't care when her appointment is. She'll just be there. Okay, looks like I see the logs flowing in the background there. And then we should be getting a response here shortly. It says your appointment has been successfully scheduled. Let's actually go look at our bookings table to see if there's anything there. And yes, we do have one available, and it has a patient ID of 2, so that's our new patient. Okay, so let's start a new thread and go through the process of like listing out our appointments. So, hey, I forgot my upcoming appointments. Can you help me? And what we're going to do here is our OpenAI Assistant is going to probably ask us for some information to figure out who they are talking to. So we're talking to Sugar at wolfwolf.com. What our OpenAI Assistant is going to do, or our booking assistant, is going to go and look for a patient profile that matches that email address. And then we should see our booking assistant go back to our application here and get all their bookings for that given customer or that given patient. And that worked. So it says you have an upcoming appointment on January 15th, 2025 at 1 p.m. Let's see. Okay, let's say I think I am going to be sick that day. Can you cancel my appointment? Let's see what the booking assistant does and how it behaves. Again, it's submitting our request through Func Runner to OpenAI. It says your appointment on January 15th at 1 p.m. has been successfully canceled. So if I go back over here, I should see this record disappear. Perfect. Now let's see what happens when we ask, what upcoming appointments do I have now? And it should say something to the effect of, you have no appointments. Would you like to schedule one? You currently have no appointments. So we went through the whole flow right there. We created a new patient. We got a list of their bookings. We created a patient profile. We created a booking, and we canceled a booking. So that's pretty cool. All right, what we're going to do now is create an additional function to wrap up this tutorial to update an existing booking. So we went through the whole, basically the CRUD functionality of function calling in OpenAI Assistants, okay? So let's get started. We are continuing to follow the same pattern as always. So we're gonna update a booking, and that we will have a booking ID of int, and then we want to do a year, int, month, or excuse me, we want to have a year, month, day, and hour for our booking. So really this is just going to allow patients to change their booking date time. Okay, that's all it's really going to do. So what we will do is first we need to find a booking with that ID. So we're going to get that booking with the booking ID. Okay, and if not booking, we need to return, sorry, we couldn't find a booking with that ID. And then we are going to set our appointment at the current, that year, month, day, and hour we are passing in. And then we're going to do session dot commit, and then we're going to return that booking. Successfully updated booking. Let's make sure I spell successfully correctly. All right, so that's pretty straightforward and simple. Let's go ahead and see it in action. We're going to restart our server over here. We have an update booking method now available. Okay, let's go over here, and I'm going to start a new thread. And I want to say, hi, what appointments do I have coming up? And then our booking assistant's likely going to come back and ask us, you know, who are you? And then we're going to have to give them our email. So what's happening right now is that our message was passed through Func Runner to OpenAI, and then OpenAI was determining what to do. So we are now being asked to give our email address. So I'm going to pass in the email address for one of the patients, Matthew in this particular example. And I do not believe there are any bookings currently in here for that given patient. Nope. So we should see our logs start flowing. We should see a request for the patient profile, and then a request to get all the patient's bookings, right? So we're seeing that come through here shortly. Patient profile is being returned back to OpenAI. OpenAI is queuing it up. It has the patient profile now, and then it's determining whether or not it needs to call another function, which it ultimately say yes to, and ask to call the get patient bookings method. So whenever you see a run with the status of queued, that means it's waiting on OpenAI side of things. Okay, so that means OpenAI is waiting to process that message off their queue, not Func Runner's queue. All right, and sometimes it can be instant, sometimes it takes a couple seconds. It really just kind of depends on how busy OpenAI is at any given time. So right now we are just kind of waiting for OpenAI to get back to us. Okay, we had a little bit of a headache with OpenAI having some intermittent issues. It didn't look like it was anything on our end. It just looks like OpenAI was quite busy at the time. So we're going to run through this again. I went ahead and re-queued up a message saying, hey, what appointments do I have coming up? It says, would you like to schedule one? Let me know. So let's say yes. Let's schedule an appointment for the Friday after next at 4 p.m. So that should be 2 Fridays from now. Let's see if OpenAI does a good job of using that relative time phrase there that we just used. It should be like roughly, I don't know, at the current date time, I don't know, 12, 13 days ahead of now. Yeah, it's 10 days ahead of now. Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so we do have an appointment coming up. Let's say it says it's at January 17th, which is the Friday after next Friday at 4 p.m. Perfect. Okay, so now we want to demonstrate that update functionality we just wrote. Let's say, oh, I'm sorry, I meant 5 p.m. Okay, so if I go over here and I look at my bookings table, I have that 1600 time right there. I want to see it actually go in there and update that booking with the appropriate time. So let's see if the booking assistant actually does that. It says booking, update the booking. Your appointment has been updated. So let's go back over here and it should say 1700 now. And it does. Perfect. That's great. So we just went through the whole process of creating a basic booking assistant with using OpenAI and Func Runner. Now you could continue to build upon this as much as you want, right? Obviously, this is not production ready for an actual clinic. You would want to add some additional things in here, some additional features, whether it's around managing a patient profile or just security considerations. So for example, maybe we have to in the future create some sort of like secret word or verify a birthday before making any changes, that kind of thing. So, something similar to what you would do on the phone, right? Whenever you're making any changes, usually when you call up a clinic, they ask you like your name and your address and your birth date, and if you can't give all that information, they assume that you're not you, right? Because anybody that's you should know that information. So if you're still around, you did a great job going through that tutorial. But don't leave yet. I want you to make sure you go check out funcrunner.com, FUNCRUNNER.com, to learn more about Func Runner. I worked really hard on Func Runner to make integrating function calling super easy for you, so you can quickly start building out the proof of concept applications that you need, or even production ready applications for OpenAI assistants, especially if you want those assistants to do anything meaningful like call external resources or save records to a database, just like we did in this tutorial. I've also done my best to document everything as much as possible, and you should always subscribe to the channel as well, because I think the videos are the best way to learn. But if you're more of a reader, you can go to docs.funcrunner.com as well, and there will be plenty of reading material for you to go through there, and it's a little bit more succinct in explaining everything, and it teaches you how to use the framework a little bit more than you could in a video. All right, so thanks again for watching the tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. Like and subscribe to my videos to learn more.